I told myself if I ever won a Grammy and I got to stand up here in front of the most powerful people in music, I would demand that labels and the industry profiting millions of dollars off of artists would offer a livable wage and healthcare, especially to developing artists. Because I got signed so young, I got signed as a minor, and when I got dropped, I had 0 job experience under my belt, and like most people, I had a difficult time finding a job in the pandemic and could not afford health insurance. It was so devastating to feel so committed to my art and feel so betrayed by the system and so dehumanized to not have health. And if my label would have prioritized artist health, I could have been provided care by a company I was giving everything to. So, record labels need to treat their artists as valuable employees with a livable wage and health insurance and protection. Labels, we got you, but do you got us?
Thanks for tuning into the Urban Scope podcast. I'm a little under the weather today, but I will be talking about that Chappell Roan speech. Very powerful speech. It's from a Grammy winner, and it's kind of rare to see someone with a Grammy win speak so be so outward with a message, especially when you receive one of the highest honors in the music industry. Usually when people win those awards, they kind of put everything in their back pocket. They kind of go, kind of revert back to, I'll get to it one day, or, things like that. But she obviously had her message written down. She went through it piece by piece. And it seemed like she was going to go on this long diatribe, but she kept it kind of short and sweet. But it was a message that we as fans and listeners and the audience that we didn't realize that artists don't have. Because usually when we see artists, they have all this money. We think they have all this money and they have access to all of these resources. But for, I guess, an artist of her stature not to have access to, or at one point didn't have access to adequate health care, kind of makes sense when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, looking back on it, or looking back on other people's situations as well. Because we do have to realize that being an artist doesn't guarantee a salary, or for, in the bigger picture, health insurance, which is very important in this country. I remember Chris Rock before saying that you don't need a gym membership, you need some coverage. And back when he first said it, I didn't understand it, but now I understand it, because you can be working out at the gym every day, which I knew somebody who used to work at the gym every day. And then this ailment came up. Now you have to go deal with that. So, sometimes genetics get in the way of your health, or sometimes like it's just your time to, figure things out. And unfortunately, you can be doing everything right and still have those situations come up. Shout out to Nate Robinson. He just had a successful kidney transplant yesterday. So I was excited to see that. But he's one of those guys that was in supreme shape, supreme athlete, and then he had to get a kidney transplant. He seemed like he was doing everything right. I'm not sure about his life outside of basketball, but it seemed like he was healthy and he was doing everything he could from a physical standpoint to stay healthy. And another thing that we do realize is that these artists struggle for years before they make it through. So when these artists are shopping their music around or trying to get noticed, sometimes it takes years and years and maybe even a decade or so to get found. And while you're doing this, sometimes they put their careers on hold or the jobs they were at on hold, and they go full time in the music. I remember Tizo Touchdown telling the story of working at a gas station, and he told his dad, I'm tired of working at the gas station. I want to do music full time. And unfortunately for him, it worked out to where he got into the industry. But, we know so many stories, or there are so many stories of people not breaking through the industry, and, and it's just sad stories, because, a lot of these artists put everything into their music. But to get noticed now, it's probably a lot easier than it was back in the day with the advent of internet and all these different apps. And TikTok and things like that, you're able to be showcased more. But Chaperone made it. She had a very important message, just for like the healthcare. She said, we got y'all, but do y'all have us? And healthcare should be something that is a given for these artists, especially artists that are signed and artists of her caliber, even when they get out of the industry. Because I've never been on tour, but I heard tour stories of how they do these 50 and 20 cities tours. It's taxing on the body. A lot of times they don't shower every day. They don't get to eat every day. Well, they eat every day, but it's like not the healthiest of foods. They have to go in these gas stations and do all these different things. And you're performing, you're using your voice. So it's taxing on the body and probably the mental as well. So health insurance should be something that should be considered in these contracts and in these deals, because I'm pretty sure these executives have insurance. The artists might probably not so much. We know it's all strictly transactional with these executives. These executives go behind the scenes and try to figure out what's best for them. And Drake is unfortunately finding that out now, that they'll use you until they can't use you anymore, or until you break the chain of command. Chaperone seems like she picked a beautiful time to do this, because she has a lot of leverage right now. She has a lot of momentum. And for her to do this, when she was coming up, it might have not boded well. But like I always say, it's best to get your message out when you have the most leverage, when you have the most power, because there's not much they can do with you at that point. Like a LeBron, when even now, he can get his message out and he's able to not get much of the backlash from it, because he's so powerful and he's so dominant in the sport. But when they see slippage, then they feel like they can go another route, and then you become expendable. But we heard stories of these labels, um, manipulating these artists. And unfortunately, most of these artists come from urban backgrounds, and they don't have the family support or the family knowledge to not get manipulated in these deals. Because if my family doesn't come from a musical background and we don't have access to these entertainment lawyers, we can be easily manipulated. They'll show us a number, and we never seen that much money before in our lives. And then we take that number and we never see that number because of all of the different things you have to go through. They talk about studio time they have to pay for, the marketing, the promo that they have to do. And you might not see that money. And at the end, you might end up owing them money if you're not doing the numbers that supersede that contract. When you think about the story of TLC, how they were selling these millions of records, but they were broke. The label bought them these RAV4s, but they didn't have money in their pockets. They said the math wasn't math. And, especially back in those days, they were selling millions of records, not streams. These was records, physical sales. The money should have been somewhere, but they never saw the money. And of course, the label kept telling them, well, we have to recoup for your events. We have to recoup for studio time, marketing, promo, your tour, album, creating the album covers and all this stuff that had nothing to do with pretty much anything. And they never got that money. And it was a sad story to see them get taken advantage of like that. And then we already know about the Bad Boy contracts. People talk about the percentages that he was taking off the top back then. It was crazy contracts, and people had to fight their way to get out of those contracts. May still talks about that to this day, about trying to get out of that contract. It's very difficult to do. Not so much now because of Diddy's current situation. But Death Row, about that. Death Row, it was pretty much run like a prison. Excuse me. It was pretty much ran like a prison. Suge Knight was pretty much controlling all the numbers. People really didn't see the numbers, and it was difficult to get out of that contract. He would resort to physical violence and all these type of things for, when people tried to get out of their contract. So it was a horrible story. And then Ruthless as well. Ice Cube was very vocal about not getting paid enough. He was writing all the rhymes for most of the people. He was working on all these hooks and different things, and his contract didn't look better than other people on the label. Well, in the group in the NWA. And he was very vocal about that. And he ended up going solo because of that. He's like, hey, I'm writing all these records and I'm not getting paid. I'm just gonna go my own route, And then, of course, Cash Money had the time where a lot of artists were saying they wasn't getting paid. Even Lil Wayne had to sue Baby for, I believe it was 10 million or so, because of a lack of financial res- uh, a lack of financial get back or whatever. So it's just horrible to hear these stories, but like we never hear about the insurance part. I'm not sure if the label offers that, but it seems like it doesn't. And then when you think about artists, that's probably the last thing they think about, because some of these artists probably never had insurance, or they haven't had insurance in a while coming up, so they don't even think about it. But doing all this touring and all this recording and studio time and dealing with the media and press, I mean, it can be taxing on the body, and eventually it'll probably catch up to you. So that's something they should think about in these contracts and in the negotiations, definitely, because it would be nothing for a label to get insurance for all their people. Even if they're charging them back, most artists won't see it anyway, but it would be a good investment to invest in your people. We saw a lot of artists who died early, unfortunately, whether it be the violence or other things, but there's a lot of medical issues with artists that have died in the past, that if they had insurance, or maybe they did have insurance, but unfortunately they weren't able to get it in an efficient or adequate amount of time. Um, but it's a tough career to go through, and I hope these executives and labels figure out the insurance situation for these artists, because, like I said, they're essential to what they're trying to do with the labels, and it'll be beneficial for them. So thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast, and until next time, I'll see you next time.